Hello everyone, we are the Group 6 from BSED 3. In our subject Assessment of Learning 2, we will tackle about process-oriented performance-based assessment. In this video, you should be able to describe what is process-oriented assessment, explain the learning competencies of process-oriented assessment, discuss how to design a task in process-oriented performance-based assessment, differentiate Analytic Rubric and Holistic Rubric, and get a good idea of when to use Analytic Rubric and when to use Holistic Rubric. We tend to assess students' learning through their outputs or products or through some kind of traditional testing. However, it is important to assess not only these competencies but also the process which the students underwent in order to arrive at these products or outputs. It is possible to explain why the students' outputs are as they are through assessment of the processes which they did in order to arrive at the final product. This module is concerned with the process-oriented performance-based assessment. Assessment is not an end in itself, but a vehicle for educational improvement. Assessment is most effective when it reflects an understanding of learning as multidimensional, integrated, and revealed in performance over time. Learning is a complex process. It entails not only what students know, but what they can do with what they know. It involves not only knowledge and abilities, but values, attitudes, and habits of mind that affect both academic success and performance beyond the classroom. Assessment should reflect this understanding by employing a diverse array of methods, including those that call for actual performance, using them over time so as to reveal change, growth, and increasing degree of integration. Such an approach aims for a more complete and accurate picture of learning. Process-oriented performance-based assessment is concerned with the actual task performances rather than the output or product of the activity. To improve students' product, we need to know about the student experience along the way in producing the product. This type of assessment can help us understand which students learn best under what conditions. With this knowledge comes the capacity to improve whole of their learning process.
Process-oriented learning competencies. The learning competencies in process-oriented performance-based assessment are stated in directly observable behaviors of students. Competencies are defined as groups or clusters of skills, abilities needed for a particular task. The objectives generally focus on the behaviors which exemplify a best practice for the particular task. Such behaviors range from a beginner or novice level up to expert level. For example, reciting a poem by Edgar Allan Poe. This activity aims to enable the students to recite a poem entitled The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Specifically, to recite the poem from memory without referring to notes, to use appropriate hand and body gestures in delivering the piece, to maintain eye contact with the audience while reciting the poem, to create the ambience of the poem through appropriate rising and falling intonation, and to pronounce the words clearly and with proper diction. Notice that the objective starts with a general statement of what is expected of the student from the task and then breaks down the general objectives into easily observable behaviors when reciting a poem. The specific objectives identified constitute the learning competencies for the particular task. Competency is said to be more complex when it consists of two or more skills. The following competencies are simple competencies. Speak with a well-modulated voice, draw a straight line from one point to another point, and color a leaf with a green crayon. The following are more complex competencies. Recite a poem with feeling using appropriate voice quality, facial expression, and hand gestures. Construct an equilateral triangle given 3 non-collinear points. Draw and color a leaf with green crayon.
Task designing. Learning tasks need to be carefully planned. In particular, the teacher must ensure that the particular learning process to be observed contributes to overall understanding of the subject or course. Some generally accepted standards for designing a task include identifying an activity that would highlight the competencies to be evaluated. Example, a poem, writing an essay, manipulating the microscope, etc. Identifying an activity that would entail more or less the same set of competencies. If an activity would result in too many sets of competencies, then the teacher would have difficulty assessing the student's competency on the task. Finding the task that would be interesting and enjoyable for the students. The tasks, such as writing an essay, are often boring and cumbersome for the students. Possible task design. Bring the students to a pond or creek. Ask them to find all living organisms they can find near the pond or creek. Also, bring them to the playground to find as many organisms they can. Observe how students will develop a system for finding such organisms, classifying them, and concluding the difference in biological diversity of the two sites.
Scoring rubric is a scoring scale used to assess students' performance along a task-specific set of criteria. Authentic assessment typically are criterion reference measures, that is, a student's aptitude on a task is determined by matching the student's performance against a set of criteria to determine the degree to which student's performance meets the criteria for the task. To measure student performance against a predetermined set of criteria, a rubric or scoring scale is typically created which contains the essential criteria for the task and appropriate levels of performance for each criterion.
Analytic versus Holistic Rubrics. For particular tasks you assign students, do you want to be able to assess how will the students perform in each criterion, or do you want to get a more global picture of the students' performance on the entire task? The answer to that question is likely to determine the type of rubric you choose to create or use, analytic or holistic.
Analytic rubric. Most rubrics, like the recitation rubric mentioned in Module 4, are analytic rubrics. An analytic rubric articulates levels of performance for each criterion so the teacher can assess student performance on each criterion. Using that recitation rubric, a teacher could assess whether a student has done a poor, good, or excellent job in criterion, creating ambience and distinguish it from how well the student did on voice inflection.
So students, here is the example of analytic rubric. Please pause the video and try to read and understand the given example. In contrast, a holistic rubric does not list separate levels of performance for each criterion. Instead, a holistic rubric assigns a level of performance by assessing performance across multiple criteria as a whole. So again, students, please pause the video for another example of the analytic rubric that can be turned into a holistic rubric.
When to choose an analytic rubric. Analytic rubrics are more common because teachers typically want to assess each criterion separately, particularly for the tasks that involve a large number of criteria. It becomes more difficult to assign a level of performance in Holistic Rubric as the number of criteria increases. Additionally, an Analytic Rubric better handles the weighting of criteria. So, when may you use a Holistic Rubric? Holistic Rubric tends to be used when a quick or gross judgment needs to be made. If the assessment is a minor one, such as a brief homework assignment, it may be sufficient to apply a holistic judgment. Example, check, check plus, or no check, to quickly review student work. On some tasks, it is not easy to evaluate performance on one criterion independently of performance on a different criterion. For example, many writing rubrics are holistic because it is not always easy to disentangle clarity from organization or content from presentation. So, some educators believe a holistic or global assessment of student performance better captures student ability on certain tasks. That's all for today. Hope you understand our lesson. Thank you for watching.